Okay, now we are.
Okay. Good afternoon, professor, classmates. Today, Cristobal,
Good
Mariana, and
afternoon.
I will be talking about Pride and Prejudice. My name is Grace. Next slide, please. So, Jane Austen, who was the author of this book, was born in Steventon in the south of England the 16th of December of 1775. She was the seventh out of 8 siblings, and her literary work marked the transition from neoclassicism to romanticism. Persuasion shows some aspects of romantic ideals. Here is a short fragment of this novel that proves this. So, as you can see, here she talks about the landscape and the nature and describe it in depth. She wanted to show the beauty of that place. Also, it is important to say that she was raised in a religious quiet environment that in somehow can explain the strong moral background of her works. And she also created the comedy of manners of middle-class life in the England of her time, revealing the possibilities of what is called domestic literature. Next slide, please. So, as you can see, here are some of one of her more important books, starting with Sense and Sensibility. In 1811, she published her first novel called Sense and Sensibility under a pseudonym. This book had quite a good reception, but only in private circles. Then, in 1813, she published Pride and Prejudice. However, very few copies were printed, and only some of her more intimate friends had access to this book. In 1814, Mansfield Park was published. However, it did not have a good reception as the novel did not receive any public reviews until 1821. In 1816, Emma was published, and this book was considered to be her best work and an exponent of her evolution as a writer. Also, it was a success in sales. And finally, in 1818, after her passing, some of her books were published with her name on it for the first time. Next, please. Okay, in terms of the plot, this plot follows the relationship between Elizabeth Bennet, who is the daughter of a country gentleman, and Fitzwilliam Darcy, who is a rich aristocratic land owner. The whole point of this novel is that they must overcome the sins of pride and prejudice in order to fall in love and marry. Here in the next slide, there is the chronological events that explain how the novel was developed. So in the first chapter of the book, the news that a wealthy young gentleman named Charles Bingley has rented the manor of Netherfield, which is some kind of estate. It caused like a great deal in that place because bachelor men did not go there very oftenly, and the whole point of this novel is the idea to marry young ladies to wealthy men. Afterwards, Mr. Bennet visits the family of Elizabeth Bennet, and he's somehow taken with Jane, who is her sister. Afterwards, they went to a ball where Mr. Darcy himself attracted to Elizabeth, and Jane's friendship with Mr. Bingley somehow continues to grow. In the following events, Elizabeth and Jane return home, and there's a new character. This character is Mr. Collins, who is the one who is going to inherit their house. So in case if you didn't know, in that time when a father had only daughters, the house when he passed away was going to belong to a man. It was never going to go to a woman. That's why they all had to get married, because if they don't and their father pass away, they are going to end up living in the streets. So Mr. Collins arrives and wants to marry Elizabeth. However, she rejects him as he does not love him. Following this event, the Bingleys and Darcy leave Netherfield and return to London, which is not a good thing because Jane was in love with Mr. Bingley, and Darcy during this time proposes to Elizabeth, but she rejects him as she thinks that he is the cause why her sister and Mr. Bingley did not marry and end up together. Afterwards, a letter arrives explaining that Elizabeth's younger sister ran away with a man, and this is quite a scandal, which could mean the ruin of the family. However, this is solved by Mr. Darcy, which is the one who found the couple and makes sure that they got married. At the end of the book, finally, after all of these events, Mr. Bingley returns to Netherfield and proposes marriage to Jane, while Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth also get married. Well, he proposes, and at the end, they get also married. Slide, please. Okay, in terms of the historical context, the first years of the 19th century enshrined the romantic ideal. In case you didn't know, the word romantic was used for over a century in order to describe sunsets, the character of young ladies in love, impossible romances, and passionate language. Also, this period of time, known as the Georgian era, was a transitional period that brought many changes, such as the French Revolution, the shift from alignment to romantic trends in arts and letters, the first whispers of feminist and abolitionist concerns in Western Europe. Also, Marie Antoinette was guillotined and Napoleon rose to power and conquered most of Western Europe. However, none of these events were featured in the literary work of Jane, as she was not interested in the past and rather omit the present, which is kind of really interesting, as she lived in a really tumultuous time and decided to only write about country and family life. Now you can go to the next slide.
Well, moving on to the characters. I'm Cristobal, by the way. First, we have Elizabeth Bennet. She's the novel protagonist. She's the second daughter of Mr. Bennet, and she is the most intelligent and sensible of the five Bennet sisters. She's really well looking, and she's characterized because she had a tongue that was occasionally sharp for her own good. But something interesting about this character is her integrity and her commitment to it. Then we have first William Darcy. He's the other protagonist. He is a wealthy gentleman, the master of Pemberley, and the nephew of Lady Catherine de Bourgh, which is another character that I'm going to explain later. As a person, Mr. Darcy is intelligent and honest. His excess of pride causes him to look down on his social inferiors, and she is quite. He had a lot of prejudices about the middle class, and that's why he at first he wasn't like kind of in love of Miss Elizabeth, but in the end he fell in love with her. Then we have Jane Bennet. She's the eldest and most beautiful Bennet sister, and Jane is more reserved and gentle than Elizabeth. And the story she meets Charles Bingley, which is the other character, which is the a friend of Mr. Darcy, and he's considerable wealth. His wealthy best friend. He's a genial, well-intentioned, and gentleman. And in comparison to the status of Mr. Darcy and his prejudices, he's blissfully uncaring about class differences. Then we have Mr. Bennet. Well, he's considered the patriarch of the Bennet family, a gentleman of modest income with five unmarried daughters. Mr. Bennet has a sarcastic, cynical sense of humor that he uses to purposefully irritate his wife, and this is well stated in the book. Then we have Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Bennet's wife. She is a foolish, noisy woman whose only goal in life is to see his daughters married. This is a quite interesting character because through her you can see how the role of women at the time was. I mean, were quite dependent on a man, and they were looking for marriage. I mean, not all of them, but she as a mother, she did. Then we have George Wickham, which is considered a handsome military officer. Wickham's good look and charm attract at first to Elizabeth, but then he disappeared, and he initially got like the good guy looking, like he was nice, but in the end he was kind of an antagonist of the book. Then we have Lydia Bennet. She's the youngest Bennet sister, and she's gossipy, immature, and self-involved. And change the slide, please. Well, then we have Mr. Collins. He's a clergyman who is tend to inherit Mr. Bennet's property. Mr. Collins' own social status is nothing like to brag about, but he takes great pains to let everyone and anyone know that Lady Catherine de Bourgh served as his patroness. He's medium class, as I mean, in his social status, but he's always pretending to be like high class, or and telling everyone who is his patroness. And then we have Miss Bingley. Bingley is Novice's sister. Miss Bingley bears inordinate disdain for Elizabeth's middle class background. Her vain attempts to garner Darcy's attention cause Darcy to admire Elizabeth's self-proposed character even more. Then we have Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Well, she's a rich, bossy noblewoman. She's Mr. Collins' patron and Darcy's aunt. Lady Catherine epitomized class snobbery. Her role in this book is quite important because she established the bridge between the classes, and she represents a block between Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy's love story. Then we have Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, Mr. Bennet's brother and his wife. The Gardiners are caring, nurturing, and full of common sense, and they prove to be like a second parents of Mr. Bennet's daughters. And finally, we have Charlotte Lucas, which is a dear friend of Elizabeth, and she seems to be quite romantic, but the development of her of this character is quite controversial because it proves that even though she was presented as a romantic character, she accepted to get married to a man she didn't love. She was more interested in getting a better life quality. And change the slide, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes? Okay.
Yes, yes.
So now in the setting, Pride and Prejudice is set in England in the late 1700s and early 1800s. The exact dates are unclear, but we know that it takes place sometime during the Napoleonic Wars between 1797 and 1850. And the novel was written and revised between the 1796 and 1813. So maybe Jane Austen sets the novel up in the time that she was writing it. And the story occurs between different locations set in England, including Brighton, London, and the counties of Hertfordshire. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it well. Um, in Derbyshire and Kent. But there's the little detailed description of these geographical settings. So the narrator in this novel is anonymous and is written in third person omniscient narrator. That means that the narrator is unnamed and stands out of the characters and events, and he provides the knowledge and information about them more specifically. So one example is how Pride and Prejudice begins, and maybe it's an observation very known, and it says, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in a possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." So in that note, we can see that the observation does not proceed from a character, but from the omniscient narrator, who knows more than just a simple character. So in the symbolisms, well, the most obvious symbol is the couples dancing. That as dancing is always a symbol of the couple's compatibility, and here is a symbol of their relationship. When Elizabeth and Darcy dance together for the first time, their steps are like quite artificial, and they're formal, like their relationship at that moment. And they didn't know what to do, and they're like hesitating, um, and they are kind of awkward with breaks in their conversations. Um, Another symbol is the outdoor settings. These settings are symbol of openness and of understanding of the expectations of the society. Um, and in outdoors, Darcy and Elizabeth move to each other emotionally. But in indoor settings, their misunderstandings tend to grow, tend to be bigger. So in outdoors, they feel more. They feel more with more freedom than in indoors settings. So in the third, we have Pemberley. Pemberley formality that the author Jane Austen describes are as formal and not falsely adorned. So here is the lack of pretension and the refined taste and gracious welcome that is experienced in Pemberley. It also describes the man as much as the manor, as Jane Austen says. And Elizabeth falls in love with Darcy because she sees his true character that is revealed through his home. And lastly, We have the style of the houses that function as the outward signs of their owner's inward character. Um, a small-scale home like the Bennets is presented as a suitable and to raise a modest place to raise their 5 daughters. But on the contrary, Lady Catherine's state of Rosings or Darcy's home in Pemberley are um, are a symbol of their enormous wealth and they're symbols of social prestige. Um, I'm sorry, here there is so much noise. Um, well, and then Elizabeth sees Pemberley um, um, by the beauty and the size. She's like um, she is in like um, she's ah, like really she looked like the beauty and the size of the state. Okay, so in the analysis in this book shows that different facets of life. Um, there are happy moments and bad times, and an insatiable search for happiness and the true love in a society that that rejected those pure feelings. So, in addition, it shows men not exercising their profession, but they were showing their family and social facets. But on the other hand, women uh, are shown are carriers of a knowledge that leads them to overcome various difficulties that they face in order to reach a full maturity. So it is said that Jane Austen tries to oppose pride and prejudice, well, pride to prejudice, and facing the society in which she had to live in a mirror. Well, she tried to expose all those horrors of the class, and she wanted to see herself in nature without that characterization that she used to. So, as it says, try to look for happiness and true love. And she tried to break those schemes that hide the real meaning of life.
Well, these are the main themes of the book. First, we have love. Well, Pride and Prejudice contains one of the famous love stories in English literature, which is the courtship between Darcy and Elizabeth. They have to go through plenty of blocks in order to realize they were in love from towards each other. Um, some of these blocks are Lady Catherine, because she was attempted to control the life of Mr. Darcy, and she planned to him. He planned Mr. Darcy to get married to his daughter, but Elizabeth was a problem for her. But they overcome the situation, and at the end, in the end, fell in love. Um, they fell in love. Also, there's another one which is Miss Bingley's Snobbery. When the when the friend of Mr. Darcy, based on the prejudices she had about the class of Elizabeth, she didn't thought that she didn't think she was worthy enough. But in the end, again, they overcome of this situation. And for the author, love is represented as independent of the social forces. It means that there are plenty of blocks, but they are able to overcome them. Then we have reputation. Um, in this book, it is well stated how women's reputation is quite important, and and how women are expected to behave in certain ways, and if they step outside of their social norms, it makes it made them vulnerable to ostracism. Then we have the family. Well, family is an integral theme in the novel. All of the characters operate within connections that shape their decisions and perspective. I mean, everything was connected to the family because, for instance, the business of Mr. Bennett's, the of Mrs. Bennett, the purpose of her was to make all their daughters to get married. And so the theme of the family shows that individuals never lead totally autonomous lives and that individuals' actions have wider criminal implication. Everything is connected to how the family is structured and what the desire of the family is. Then we have the integrity. Elizabeth Bennet considers herself to have a very high standards of integrity and is often frustrated and disappointed by the way she sees others behaving. She always behaves in ways she considers consistent with her definition of integrity. For instance, when she refused to marry Mr. Collins and Mr. Darcy because she didn't feel she was in love with them or like she was or they were worthy of her. And and following his integrity, she was committed to marry or to fall in love with someone who was worthy, which was the Mr. Darcy. Then we have gender. Gender also is a key theme in Pride and Prejudice. The story takes place at a time when gender roles were quite rigid, and men and women had a very different set of options and influences. Marriage is a pressing question for female characters like Charlotte Lucas and the Bennett sisters, because marriage is the only way women can achieve economic stability and autonomy. It's like the what I mentioned before. Um, the only way they had to get stability was getting married, even if they were not in love. I mean, marriage was the only way to escape from poverty in the case of these women because they were mid class. And then we have class. Well, this theme is related to reputation, and the lines of class are strictly drawn. For instance, while the Bennets, who are middle class, may socialize with the upper class, which were the Bingleys and Darcys, they are clearly their social inferiors and they are threatened as much. Um, of course, there are certain characters that represent this. For instance, Mr. Collins, he was mid class, but she worked for a higher class, which was um, Miss Catherine. He goes around always talking good things about her and her position. Also, we have Wickham, who will do anything he can get to he can and he will do anything he can um to get enough money to raise himself into a higher station. In this case, he got married with the one of the youngest Bennett sister just because he was paid for doing it. And let's move on to the other. Well, first we have the literary devices. We have personification. After Jane received the letter that confirmed that Mr. Bingley would remain in London all winter, Jane expressed her sorrow for her sister, and she said her heart was divided between concern for her sister and resentment against all the others. Well, this shows the characterization of Jane as compassionate for those who are her close companions. Elizabeth gradually changes into a more compassionate viewpoint. Then we have a simile, which is a comparison using as or like. Well, in this case, we have your profusion makes me saving, and if you lament over him much longer, my hair will be as light as a feather. Well, by comparing her heart to a feather, it develops the characterization of Elizabeth and how she portrays herself to her family. Then we have imaginary, which is through a vivid description of the scenes that take place in the novel, the reader can get in view of the ideas regarding the social background of the novel. You are able to imagine how the place is or where the action is taking place. For instance, the gentleman had joined the ladies. Tea was over and card tables were placed. Scarcely a syllable was uttered that did not relate to the game. A great deal more passed at the other table. Lady Catherine was generally speaking, stating the mistake of the three others or relating some anecdotes of herself. Sir William did not say much. With this description, we can imagine the scenario in which this conversation is taking place. Change the slide, please. And the last one, we have the irony. When this statement is reflected back, it is ironic that a woman who is not able to charm a man to dance is suitable enough to marry. This shows the dynamic character of Mr. Darcy, as he is less prideful and egotistic after he proposes for the second time. There, the irony that is associated with Mr. Darcy is a pertinent role in the development of the plot. As it says toward the beginning of Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy's relationship, Mr. Darcy claims that Elizabeth is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt. But in the end, they end up getting married. So that's the irony. And the other one, please. Well, and this is the later influence of the author. Well, Jane influenced many famous writers such as Virginia Woolf, Henry James, Marcel Proust, E.M. Forster, Ivy Compton Burnett. They all had something to say about this author, sorry. And but the one that caught our attention was Miss Virginia Woolf. She said that Jane was the best writer. She doesn't try to write like a man. All other women do. For this reason, I do not read them. This is important because by the time women were not seen as capable of men of getting published or writing or doing something like this. So for a woman to get published with her name was something important because most of the by the time many women had to use a male name to get published. And Jane influenced the future generation by placing uh, her as a woman, in a higher position in terms of writing and with her with her books. And change the slide. I think that's the last one. Yeah, that's the last one. This was our presentation. Thank you for paying attention. If you have any question, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Cristóbal, Grace, and Mariana for your book report. Let's see. I have a couple of questions, but I would like if there's any from the rest of the audience, if they pop up first before mine, that would be good, right? Um, All right, Mariana, just to clarify, because you all, as a group,
Yes.
you already mentioned this, all right? But Mariana, could you refer to, because you refer to the Jane Austen as the precursor of the comedy of manner. Could you explain the comedy of manner, or what the comedy of manner is, and also your own perception about the gender roles at the time that this novel was written? Comedy of manners and gender roles.
Professor,
Yes.
that
Yes,
was
ma'am.
me. It wasn't Mariana.
I know.
Okay.
I usually cross-examined,
Yes.
so
Well,
yes.
um, well, she tried to portray women as more important than just their normal lives. I think that men didn't have like much influence in the story. They just Jane Austen just portrayed men just in their family and their social life. So women were the ones um, who were experiencing and those all the other facets, and that is like the important. I think it is important in, well, I can relate to feminism nowadays, because I think it is quite important to see how women were uh, portrayed in that time. I mean, um, I don't know how to explain it very well, but
That's all right. That's all right.
yes,
All
yes,
right, Marina. Thank you so much. My next question is for Grace. Grace, the Bennets, interesting family. How do they get along? How do they relate to each other? What's the relationship that the father has with daughters or the mother? Could you explain that a little bit more
Yes.
extended, please?
Okay, so the relationship between the Bennets, it's not the best one, considering that Elizabeth kind of resents her mother as she thinks that she doesn't care really about them, and her only concern is for them to get married. She considers her mother a little bit superficial and not very smart. And in terms of her father, Mr. Bennet, his favorite daughter is Elizabeth. He really doesn't care about the other ones, and especially the younger ones. For example, Kitty and the other one. I can't remember her name. And that's the reason why one of the younger sisters eloped with an older man, because he really doesn't care about the others. And also, the oldest sister is the favorite daughter of the mother, because she's a beauty young woman who could, in her eyes, who could save the family of bankrupt. Bankrupt? I don't know. I think that's how you say that word. And
Yes,
Elizabeth
bankrupt. Yes.
also, yes, Elizabeth also has a very good relationship with Jane. Who, yeah, that's the name. Jane is the older sister. They really get along and share their feelings. And the other sisters are kind of ignored as they are younger, and they are really kind of a little bit superficial. And that's the relationship between the Bennets in
Grace,
a few words. Yes,
do you have sisters?
yes, I have a younger sister.
So, how would you put on the character's shoes? Do you have something similar going on in your own life, like the conflict in the Bennett family?
No, we do not have conflicts. We all have a very good relationship with our parents and with my sister. So we are not very similar to them. Even though I think that my sister
All
is my
right.
favorite daughter, my father's favorite daughter. So maybe that's similar to the story.
Okay. Well, that happens, right? That
Yeah.
happens. uh, e- Even though parents deny it,
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know about that. Right. Thank you so much. Mhm.
Okay.
Finally, last but not least, of course, um, Cristobal.
Yes.
Hello. Yes. Okay,
Yes.
Cristobal.
Yep.
There was a Yes, there was a concept you mentioned. You as a group. Well, I think you yourself. The concept of courtship. I was going to ask you about the setting because it was very interesting how the setting sort of reflected the character's attitude. When in the open, behaving in one way. When in indoors, right, they behaved in a different way. But I consider that the concept of courtship is interesting. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the concept of courtship in those times and nowadays? Is it different nowadays as well? The concept of courtship, does it
I
exist?
I mean, when it comes to courtship, they are referring to the love story. In this case, the characters go through to realize they were in love. In this case, all the barriers or the blocks they had to go through to get together. Um, let's say um, the period in which the couple develop the romantic relationship. If it's if but for instance at the beginning when they first met the first impression wasn't like the right they Elizabeth had a certain pride and Mr. Darcy has her prejudice about her and how the relationship went at the time wasn't the right one. But then he started a period at the house. He started to be behaving in a different way with her. Um, I don't know. For instance, when he declares her his love to her, and he claims that he was in love, that he was kind of different to the other people. Uh, he didn't care her her class, but comparing to how it happens nowadays, it's quite different because people just can't meet each other, or the way they met is through, I mean, online, or the way they is today we are different in terms of expressing our feelings like it was at the time. I don't know if you understand my point.
Yes, I understand it, but I would like to elaborate a little bit more about today's concept of courtship. Does it exist? In what way it's different?
I mean, it
Professor,
is yes.
Yep,
eh, I wanted to add something that maybe could help Cristobal to develop his point of view.
sure, go ahead.
Okay, during those times, young people who were single could not talk unless they were introduced by another people who were acquainted with both of them. I think that's quite important. So, Cristobal,
Uh,
maybe you can explain that.
yeah, because today we don't have to be introduced for someone else. We just introduce ourselves. Or we met um, in a different way, but we are the ones who introduce each other. I mean, we just met before, and the other time they had to be introduced. And sometimes the arrangement were fixed by someone else. In this case, for the family. That's how it has changed. That's my answer.
All right. Yes, I was waiting for someone to step into the conversation from your group. I don't know
Well,
if there's
yes.
any. Yes, go ahead.
Can I add something? Well, nowadays,
Absolutely.
I think social media is quite important in terms of courtship, maybe, because people generally talk through social media and they can meet each other, um, and they can, well, know each other even though they don't see themselves in person. They don't meet themselves in person.
Also, it's quite interesting that when two people who were young and single in that time couldn't be alone, they had to have a chaperone supervising their interaction all the time. That's the reason why the only way that they had to speak privately was in balls and that kind of social setting.
Yes, it was pretty different
Yes,
from what is
from
now.
nowadays.
Yes.
All right. Interesting topic. The idea how courtship or how women and men relate to each other, and what is good behavior or what is expected from each one of in terms of gender roles. How is a woman expected to behave? What is a man expected to do? And how I don't know, passive or active roles we achieve. And this is developed in this story. And also, we can see how things change through the years, right? At least we have the possibility to read this description and also readers from that time were only able to, read the description from the book, but did not have the chance to compare different realities, which is something that we could do. And since this is a classic, right? People will have a chance to still compare their own realities, which was described. I think the word dowry is one interesting concept that has been. Do you know the meaning of dowry? Sorry.
I'm sorry, which was the word?
Dowry. Let me. Sorry, it's Doury. Dowry. Dowry is the amount of money or property or resources or sometimes animals that a woman's parents,
Mm,
or
la
tutors
dote.
had to give the man. La dote, exactly. Dote,
Yeah,
that's the dowry.
yeah.
So that's been present in many societies in different times. Do we still have dowry these days?
I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I wouldn't say that we don't. I would like to think that we don't have that.
Yeah, at least not in Western societies, but I would say that in some Eastern societies, talk about Arabia or
Yes.
Japan. I don't know, right? There might
Japan,
be.
right?
Yes, that
We didn't know
exists.
that. That's
Yeah,
quite
so
horrible.
it yeah, it's like okay, I have invested this amount of money in my daughter, and now I expect it to be back when she goes away. It's like an investment for some.
Yes. I remember that I saw a documentary. It was from a country from Africa, but that group of people used to do that. Like uh, um, they gave dowry, in order to have like, well, they gave like animals or meat or milk and things like that. And I remember that
Yes,
documentary.
Right, good piece of information. And that was not long ago, wasn't it?
No, it was like in 2 years ago.
So you see that we're talking about a novel written in 1700s, maybe, and what you're referring to is a documentary that took place, I guess, during the last 1-2 years, right? Something quite recent, and we still have this situation in which women or daughters are considered to be some sort of property that is exchanged with the husband. So the husband has to give something in return, and I guess that doesn't happen with the male, with the sons. Um, I think so. I guess because in general, men or sons are expected to help, are expected to work. They are expected to, help with the crops, with the harvest, with any, manual activity. So I don't know. It's been different, the way that the genders have been treated and what is or has been expected from women and men in different times, right? Different roles, different responsibilities, different expectations. It's time for us to finish. Hopefully, sorry for taking so much of the time. Also, an interesting topic and interesting ideas in this book. How we perceive the way we romantically relate to each other. Hopefully, Pride and Prejudice, the title was clear for you. Why the name? The type of influence of this writer onto several very, very important British writers. And one of the main reasons, right, is she dared, right, to write as a woman. She was not copying male patterns, and that's important in a society in which women were not given their the rights, right, that they deserved at that time, that they now have in many societies. So interesting piece of literature. Again, not just because of the story, but because it makes us connect or make connections with the type of society described at that time and our own contemporary one. Sorry again for taking up your time, but thank you for your book report, Mariana, Grace, and Cristobal. Another very good report. I'm going to stop recording.